This lecture is on the 5 approaches to conflict, often known as the Thomas-Kilman 5 modes of conflict. Okay, so the 5 approaches to conflict are as follows. You can avoid, you can compete, you can accommodate, you can compromise, or you can collaborate. And each of these approaches to conflict has its own strengths and weaknesses. So first, I want to characterize what each of these modes of conflict means, and then I want to talk about the situations in which they're most helpful. So avoiding conflict literally means avoiding the conflict, completely refusing to deal with it. Now, that's not quite the same as being passive aggressive, which might still acknowledge the conflict. Avoiding the conflict is really just saying, what conflict? I don't see a conflict. So the question, what conflict, is my heuristic for remembering what it means to avoid a conflict. When you're approaching conflict as a competitor or in a competitive fashion, you're taking the position that I'm right, you're wrong. Or in order for me to win, you have to lose, which means I'm going to get my side or you're going to get your side. So that's a competitive approach to conflict. And it means that I'm just going to try to get what I want. I'm not really going to engage in any kind of integrative solution seeking. Okay. The flip side of competing is accommodating. Whereas competing says, I'm right, you're wrong. Accommodating says, you're right, I'm wrong. So in accommodating, I'm just going to give you whatever you want. Okay, so the compromising as an approach to conflict is kind of like saying, we're both wrong. So compromising is, people often talk about compromising as if it's a good thing. People frame compromising as a way of everybody getting what they want, but really compromising is nobody getting what they want. As we saw in some of the examples from the integrative solution generation, think back to that radio station and the engineering company. If they had compromised on the number of hours they each gave to each other, tech support and advertising, neither would have really gotten what they wanted. So compromising is often upheld as a very excellent approach to conflict, but it's really not ideal. And then finally, collaborating is like saying we're both right. Collaborating means looking for those win-win solutions, those integrative opportunities. Okay, so if you take a minute and ask yourself, which of these approaches to conflict do I use? You're likely to say, well, kind of all of them. I use different approaches to conflict in different scenarios. And if that's your approach, that's exactly what you should be doing. There's no right or wrong way to approach conflict, but there are different strategies for different contexts. And each of these is good or bad at different things. So I'm going to work backwards to talk about what the strengths and weaknesses of each one. So if we think about something like collaborating, collaborating is the approach that's reflected in things like mediating. It's reflected in the integrative solution generation that we discussed in this class. It's difficult. It's slow. It's not easy. The goal is to maximize joint gain to create value. So it's a very value driven approach to conflict resolution or negotiation, but it's very slow. So collaborate when the outcome is really important. Collaborate when the relationship is really important, or when you just know that the relationship is going to be ongoing. Collaborate when there's a lot at stake, when you don't want to settle for anything other than a less than satisfactory solution. So collaboration, you should think of collaboration like optimizing. We're not always optimizers. We don't always have time to be optimizers, but when we are, that's when we collaborate. Compromising is something you might do when time is at stake. Compromising is a very quick, clean, and dirty way to resolve a situation, but when nobody's really prepared to give something up. So you might compromise when you're very time sensitive, but the outcome is very important, and it's not clear that one or the other party has more at stake or more claim to the outcome. You might accommodate. Again, if time is a factor, you might also accommodate if you're playing a longer term game. So you may accommodate in one conflict in order to build the relationship. So later when we talk about trust and reputation, I'll talk about how building subjective value in early stages leads to increased value in the long run. You might also accommodate when you just need to pick your battles, right? So that's a good rule of thumb for accommodating. Flip side, competing. You might compete when you just cannot afford to lose, when there is too much at stake. And again, when you don't have the time for a truly collaborative approach, or for whatever reason, when you don't think a truly collaborative approach would work. But of course, the risk of competing is that you might lose. So you compete when there's a lot at stake, but when you can afford the risk of losing. And then finally, you would engage in avoidance when the cost of conflict resolution is greater than the cost of just letting it fester. So you would avoid a conflict if you just maybe think you're not going to see that person, or it's just not very important to you, or you just can't even. Those are the 5 approaches to conflict, some strengths and risks of each one, and the definitions. I just want to reiterate, there's no one approach, although we do emphasize a collaborative approach in this class. That's because we emphasize the optimization when you have the time, when you have the resources, but it's not always what you're going to do. And that concludes the lecture on the 5 approaches to conflict.